What's going on? Alex here, and today we're going to do something a little different. Now, the IRS is probably one of the most despised government agencies. Pretty much everyone loves to hate on them. But today, I'm going to outline 5 things that I think are redeeming good qualities about the agency that people often don't take into consideration. So I know you might be thinking, well, Alex has done way too many tax returns. He's finally lost it. He needs a break from the tax code for a little bit. All those things may very well be true. But at the same time, I want to bring up 5 things that I believe are good qualities about the IRS that you should keep in mind when you think about the agency as a whole. So before you rush for that dislike button, just hear me out and see if I could change your mind. The first reason that I love the IRS is something known as first-time abatement. Now, you might be thinking, what is that? Well, basically it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, while a lot of taxpayers aren't aware of this, if you've had a clean compliance record within the last 3 years, meaning no penalties, no unfiled returns, and so forth, if you've been good from the IRS's perspective, you could basically get out of thousands of dollars in penalties that may be assessed in a particular tax year, and all you basically have to do is say a few magic words to the IRS, being first-time abatement. And the IRS, based on what's written in the tax code, is allowed to give you that break, which I've had saving clients thousands of dollars from a single mistake that they made they would have had to pay, that the IRS basically forgives them. Now, just imagine that being done in any other context. I mean, it's even crazy to think about. The court finds you guilty and hereby sentences you to 20 years in prison. Your Honor, I'd like to request first-time abatement. What? Well, I've been good the last 3 years, so I'm thinking we could just kind of call this one a freebie and let it go. And with regard to the states themselves, you can usually forget about first-time abatement because they're going to look at you crazy if you suggest that you want to get out of penalties based on first-time abatement. They just ain't going to do it. So what I'm saying is, you should consider the fact that the IRS, in many cases, gives you a freebie, a get-out-of-jail-free card, a way out of a substantial amount of penalties, and all you have to do is ask. And I think that's pretty cool. So that's why that's the first reason that I love the IRS. Now, the second reason I love the IRS is retro gear. Now let me ask you, how old is the computer that you're using right now? Is it 2 years old, 3 years old? Well, here's a fun fact for you. The computers that are used by the IRS are from the 1960s. And a lot of these computers, to get your tax information, utilize rolls of tape that they have to put on a reel to go on another reel, and that's how they access your tax information. It's crazy, it's antiquated, it's written in a language called COBOL that almost nobody knows at this point, and that is how they manage the tax records of hundreds of millions of Americans. And if you can imagine trying to get a system like that to work for even one taxpayer, they have to keep track of new businesses, old businesses, your tax records from prior tax years, and so forth, and they do this with relatively ancient technology. Now, I have friends who can't function with an iPhone that's more than a year old. Now, imagine being in a room full of computers where you have to put tape on, take tape out, and so forth to get information. It's absolutely crazy. But that is what the IRS is dealing with, and they've had the same computers for so many presidential terms already, it's not even funny. And they're still able to send out notices when you forget a tax return, to assess taxes for 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and so forth. So really, I think that they should be given a little bit of credit for what they're able to accomplish with such an ancient system. Now, they've tried to upgrade that system in recent years, but they've had issues because the one they have is so antiquated, and the solutions that came after that had all sorts of bugs and issues and so forth because they were trying to make the most of a limited budget, that we're still stuck with that system, which for all intents and purposes is still pretty effective, because if you play fast and loose with your tax returns, you can pretty much expect a letter in the mail at the very least from the IRS, which means they are watching. The system does work to some extent, and it's pretty amazing what they can accomplish in 2019 with computers running COBOL with tapes. So the fact that the IRS can do so much with such antiquated equipment is the second reason why I love the IRS. Speaking of doing more with less, check this out. This is the IRS's budget over the last number of years, and you can see that it's constantly decreasing. Now let me ask you a question. If your employer was decreasing your pay year after year after year, would you be as productive? Would you accomplish as much? Now here's the crazy thing. At the same time, while the IRS's budget is being slashed year after year, they're having to do more. For example, the Affordable Care Act that pretty much came out of nowhere, and then the IRS was put in charge of administering it, right? Because you had an extra line on your tax return asking if you had coverage. They had to create new forms if you didn't have coverage to calculate penalties and so forth. So while their budget is decreasing, they keep having to deal with more and more responsibility. Now, the other thing is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So they have to create all new forms and schedules and so forth to try to make sure that the forms reflected the changes in the tax code. And they have to keep doing this on the continual basis. Now, you also have to factor in that there's more businesses coming online, the population is growing and so forth, and the tax code is getting much more complex. So all that factored together means that they have to do so much more with so much less in terms of their budget. Now, I can only imagine if your employer was lowering your pay, 2-3 years in a row, you probably wouldn't be working there still. But the IRS has to pretty much take the budget that they're given and administer all of their necessary programs to make sure that the tax code is administered effectively. Now, I have to say that's pretty respectable, because I don't think in any other situation there are too many agencies doing everything that the IRS has to do on a daily basis with the budget that's ever decreasing and staff that's ever decreasing and so forth. So the IRS's ability to do more with less is another reason why I love the IRS. Now, the fourth reason why I love the IRS is the Taxpayer Advocate. Now, the Taxpayer Advocate is a division within the IRS that basically is put into effect once the IRS is dragging their feet. So essentially, if you're working with the agency to resolve any sort of tax issue or get a refund or get a tax matter looked at, and they are not addressing it in a proactive manner, you can get the Taxpayer Advocate involved, which is basically like a bulldog that you could set free to make sure that these people are moving. Now, you might be saying, well, if the IRS is that great, I wouldn't need a Taxpayer Advocate. But what I would compare it to is, let's say Comcast. If they're dragging their feet, if they're not answering your calls, if they're not helping you out, there's no advocate that you could call to work on your case, right? Let's take AT&T into account. You call them, and whoever answers the phone, you're at their whim. So there's no advocate there that you could call to help you. So the fact that there's basically a bulldog division that you could stick on the IRS if they're dragging their feet so you can actually get help in a timely manner is something that's pretty unique, and that's another reason why I love the IRS. Now, the fifth reason that I love the IRS has to do with creative tax filing and the ways that they deal with it. Check this video out.
Well, we've had everything come in from brown sugar to dust out of the vacuum cleaner to people spreading mustard on a check. Now, that check gets processed, but we just wipe the mustard off and send it to the bank.
So basically, you have a number of taxpayers that are sending in tax forms covered in dust, covered in mustard, toothpaste, and so forth. And these poor IRS workers that are being paid what have you, probably not that much, to sit there and scrape condiments off of payment checks so that the Treasury can cash the check and receive tax payments. These workers didn't do anything. They didn't write the tax code. They're not Congress or anything. They're literally just the messenger, and they have to accept tax filings that are sometimes less than sanitary and less than appetizing. And for that, I think they deserve some credit. Now, I'm pretty sure if your employer made you scrape off whipped cream and strawberries off your check, you wouldn't be all that pleased with them. But the IRS, they just wash it, clean it, and keep on trucking. And for that, I think they deserve a little bit of respect and recognition as the fifth reason why I love the IRS. Now, if a client sent me financial statements caked in mustard, let me tell you something. That's not going to fly with me, okay? I don't play those games, okay? That's not acceptable. So those are the 5 reasons why I love the IRS. Now, hopefully some of that changed your perspective, even in the slightest, because I know it's hard not to hate the IRS, but hey, you got to give them a little credit. Now, if I change your perspective even a little, go ahead and hit that like button. And if I didn't, then you can go ahead and hit that dislike button. And why don't you throw some mustard on it while you're at it.